Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Horse's Mouth Live, the Extraordinary Advisor Show. My name is Ellen Rogin, and as always, I bring guests on that have fabulous information for you to help you in every area of your life, especially your business. And our guest today, Kathleen Kingsbury, is a return guest. I think this maybe is the third time she's been on the show. And I know she's been doing a lot of work around negotiation skills. I thought, what a great topic. And we've never had that on the show before. So I invited her and she graciously said yes, that she would come back on. And this topic I really think is so important for advisors, not only as clients might be trying to negotiate fees in a different way. You may be supporting your clients in their negotiations. It's also with dealing with team members. It's just all around a really interesting topic that I think all of us, maybe some more than others, could be more skilled in. So let me give you a little bit about Kathleen Burns Kingsbury's background. And you may have seen her at conferences or in publications. She does a lot of work in financial services. She's a coach, a trainer, a consultant, the founder of KBK Wealth Connection and the host of the Breaking Money Silence podcast. She's an author and a speaker. We originally met when we were both speaking at a conference. Shatter money taboos, talk more openly about finances, and live a richer life is her fifth book. So I've written two. I'm starting on my third. On 5 feels like so ambitious, but wonderful. And she's all over our industry. And so I just want to bring her right on. Kathleen, welcome. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, Ellen, and have this conversation with you.
Yeah. So you have such a varied background in terms of expertise. And when I saw you were doing work around negotiation and the psychology of this, you're offering courses and training and coaching around negotiating more confidently. I'm curious why you're so passionate about this topic.
Well, I actually am a classic under-earner. So for years, I under-earned. I felt guilty about earning money, asking for money. So often when I go through a process where I find my voice and I'm able to speak up, I get really excited about the results. And because I felt more confident, I really thought this is something that I want to bring to the advisor audience, to the women in business that I work with. And, I'm happy to report that I embrace my financial success. I haven't been an under-earner for a long time. But when the pandemic hit, I thought to myself, what do I want to focus on during this time? And I thought, the psychology of negotiation. Haven't had time to do that, so let's dig right in. And it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah. So such an interesting topic. And I know for me, when I had my advisory practice and I would be doing reviews and talking about salaries with people, I was just honestly weird about it. I was always uncomfortable being on this side of the table. I'm sure that didn't make my staff feel more comfortable being on the other side of the table. And why do you think it's so uncomfortable for many of us to have these kinds of conversations?
Well, the part that I like that you're sharing is the fact that it's uncomfortable for the supervisor or the leader as well as the person negotiating. I think a lot of times we forget that because we get so caught up in our own heads. I believe this is one of the most awkward money conversations we have because for so long we have been told that our salary should be a secret. If you're a woman, you shouldn't be too self-promotional, too braggy. Women don't negotiate. If you're a man, it might be that you thought, I'm supposed to know how to do this. So I just think it's an awkward conversation. It brings up our self-worth. It brings up the fact that we have to show someone our value and brag a little bit. And so there's a lot there to unpack. But the good news is it's a skill like anything, any money conversation. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it.
So do you think there's a gender difference in this? I was coming to the office today. I was listening to a podcast talking about how, women don't ask for raises as much and kind of inferring that women are less skilled or experienced in this. Is that what you've seen in your work and research?
So my answer is yes and no. Okay. So I think that historically women have been in the workforce not as long. So, as a gender, we have less practice. I also think it's a little bit more complicated for women because there are, whether it's conscious or unconscious, gender bias about what it means if women are asking for what they're worth, if they are communicating their value. They have to be likable at the same time they're doing it, where a man doesn't necessarily have to be. But I've worked with a lot of men where this is just as difficult a conversation to have. So while I think it's a little bit different for a lot of women and there's some different factors, I think that we've come a long way. And if you look at the recent research, women are asking as much as men. It just may be that we are not receiving as much as men. And part of that is that double of having to be likable and ask and collaborative, not too pushy, but pushy enough. And so it's a lot to take on.
Yeah, that's complicated in terms of women's, the way women are received in terms of asking for this. I'm seeing it I have a son and a daughter, and just how, what I'm proud of is that they've both asked when they got hired for their first jobs and when they've been up for raises, they've been asking for more than I'm sure I would have been at that stage in my career. So if, you haven't been brought up in a family where it's kind of taught or thought of as fun, like what are ways that people can start to learn how to be better negotiators?
I think part of it starts with understanding your negotiation mindset. So anybody who has seen me speak or train or have done any coaching with me knows I'm big into self-awareness. So I think the first part with negotiation that a lot of times trainings don't include or we don't really think about is, what are those automatic thoughts and beliefs that we have about asking if it's for money, or you can be negotiating time? There's a lot of things you can negotiate, but what are those automatic thoughts and beliefs that you have? And then once you take a look at your mindset and make sure that you're dealing with all these, you're more aware and dealing with more conscious thoughts, then you can say, oh, I'm going to capitalize on this strength around negotiation, and I'm going to fill in this gap. So for instance, I was raised that you don't negotiate. It was rude. It's unnecessary. You're lucky to have a job. Think, Irish Catholic. Irish Catholic. And so, one of the things that I had to really realize was it was okay to speak up. It was okay to ask, and it wasn't rude. It was actually being part of being a professional and a successful professional. On the flip side, I'm really good at just throwing stuff out there and self-promoting. And so that's where my strength was. So I truly believe everybody out there has both a challenge as well as a strength when it's negotiating. And we have to start by becoming more aware of what we bring to the table and then filling in those gaps, because our gaps are different.
I could also see it being aware of what maybe our fears are around it. I could think of a fear being, oh, what if they say just no, totally? Like if I ask for too much and they're like, oh, forget it then. And then I blew an opportunity that I would have wanted to have. And that's where I think about it with fees, not so much a worth issue, but just like it feels very binary sometimes to me, which I don't think that's the way it would be.
Let me jump in on can I jump in on the fear piece?
Yeah, please.
So with the fear, what is interesting, and I'm just thinking about someone I coached on Monday who was negotiating financial services, negotiating a new job. And the fear is, if I ask for something, if I counter, if I, do that somehow they're just going to pull the offer away. Or if you're negotiating with a client, the client's going to instantaneously fire you. And if you actually ask people, how often has that happened? It's usually never to maybe once, and it's a rare occasion. So we have to keep in mind that our fears around these conversations often are in our head. They're not in reality. Because if somebody wants you for a job, if somebody wants to hire you, if somebody's working with you a long time, often they're not going to pull out the rug underneath you. It just may be that it's a no. And, that doesn't feel good, but we can all survive a no. I'm sure at this point in my life, I've heard a lot of no's and a lot of yeses, but you never know till you ask.
Yeah, the thing that's also coming up for me, and I've been on the other side of this, where people have negotiated against themselves, where I haven't asked for a discount, I haven't asked for a lower fee, and all of a sudden it gets offered to me. And I'm like, well, oh, okay, great.
Bonus.
But I would have paid the higher amount. And so do you see that happening a lot? And is that a gender thing, or it's, where people are, like I said, negotiating against themselves with no one really even being on the other side?
I see that all the time. I don't know if it's a gender thing or not. I tend to typically skew more female in terms of people that I coach, but what I find is no matter how you identify in terms of your gender, that it typically is usually your anxiety. So one of the skills that people can practice is whatever you're asking for, ask and then shut up. And I mean that very politely, like shut up. And I'm very verbal. I mean, there's a reason I speak in trade. I have a lot to say and write. But I actually write on a piece of paper, what I want to ask for and shut up. And often it's not that the first person who speaks, loses the negotiation. It's not that clear cut, but often it's just that other person's processing information and you just need to be quiet and be with it. I find the more we learn how to have skills around tolerating our anxiety, practicing these conversations so our anxiety goes down, feeling more confident in our value and our ask, that some of that tendency goes away. But certainly, yeah, you can lose the negotiation when you're not even meaning to negotiate.
So for advisors, let's talk about, I know that the industry's been under different kinds of fees, asking for a reduction in fees, whether they're a new client or an existing client. So what tips do you have for advisors how to handle conversations with either existing clients or brand new clients?
It's different depending on the type of client and the relationship you've had. We already talked about understanding your negotiation mindset. I think that's really important. I think the other thing that's important that you can take action on today is to really understand the value that you're providing, either to a future client or your current client. And remember, that isn't about the services you provide. That is about the actual results that you've had or the value you're going to bring. So it may be, I'm going to help you. I mean, this is a little oversaid, but sleep better at night. I'm going to help you coach your kids on how to be financially responsible. And I'm going to be your guide through the twists and turns of your financial life. It has to have kind of an emotional component. And if you're really listening to your clients or your prospects, they're going to tell you the values that are important. So I would say write down some value statements, really get clear on what you're providing to your clients and say it in client speak, not in financial jargon. And so it may be, I'd really love to work with you. My other clients have told me I'm a really great financial coach. I can help you financially plan. And again, we talked about passing down wealth. And I think I, have a sweet spot in that. I'd love to help you. My fee is X. Now, if you are if you're working with an existing client, you have an existing relationship, have some trust, say you're bringing up a fee increase because business has grown, expenses have gone up, the complexity of their account has gotten greater, then often what I say is do a two-part thing. One, where you would send them something in writing, and you'd give them some notification and then open the door to have a conversation. Now, this depends on, are you doing this across the board in your practice, or are you doing this with one or two people? So the letter is more if you're doing it across the board. But I think giving people a little bit of notice and then you bring it up in the next conversation with them. Don't wait for them to bring it up. Don't hide behind the fee increase. Just check in. What is sometimes interesting is people don't have a problem with it at all. I know in my experience, which is a little bit different than being a financial advisor, I've raised rates, really worried about it. And I've had people say, it's about time. I've been waiting for you to raise your rate. So I think it's two slightly different strategies, but the core there is your value statement. What are you providing? What are you hoping to accomplish? What skills do you have that you're using to accomplish that? And what results are you promising or intending? And those value statements are really, really key.
I want to touch on two other things you said. One, which I've been the recipient of people saying this, and I've said it to people that I'm working with, whether it's coaching or consulting or whatever I'm doing for them, is I'd really love to work with you authentically, not saying that to people you don't love to work with, but who wouldn't want to work with someone that's excited? Like, I think this would be so great. I'd really, really love to work with you. I think people would appreciate that. And it's not really a negotiation. I don't think it's a negotiation strategy.
People
It might
skill.
be more of people still. Yeah. And the other thing I could see happen is if a client comes and says to you, hey, I'm just wondering if these fees are too high or we could lower them. I've seen advisors do this, but I can also imagine situations where someone's defensives come up,
Yeah.
like, hey, they wouldn't say it this way, but the energy of like, do you know what I do? And do you know how good I am? And like, how can advisors, because that is not, I can't imagine would be a very good strategy for building the relationship with the client. But what do you think's going on when that happens, when someone starts to get defensive when someone's questioning their fees?
Well, often we're personalizing it because money feels personal and our fees feel personal. And so it's kind of that fight or flight thing. So all of a sudden, you're either going to get potentially anxious and be like, oh, okay, I can lower your fee. Or you can get really defensive and be like, how dare you? I certainly personally have experienced both. And you're right. We don't necessarily say that, but we might feel that in our bodies and it might be communicated. So one of the things that I say is no matter, if your client comes to you and they're questioning their fees, take a deep breath, hear them out, have them explain it a little bit more, actually lean into it, which is not our tendency. Understand what's going on and then reiterate your value. You don't have to make a decision in that first contact. So I also teach my coaching clients that there's the power of maybe. You've brought up a lot of great issues today. I hadn't really thought about it from your perspective. I'm glad we had this conversation. Let's revisit this in a week. I need to look at a few things. It gets you to have some separation. Then you can go off to your coach, your business partner, or your romantic partner, be like, I can't believe that person asked for lower fees. You can process that because it's fine to have those feelings, and then go back with a business decision about what makes sense. Maybe it's you stay the course and you just explain your value, or maybe the person has a point. I know recently I asked my advisors what their fees were, and I almost fell off my chair. And then, and then I realized and talked with them about it, and they were very calm and they told me the value they provide. And you know what? I feel better about it and didn't ask for a decrease. So it can go quite well. It just sometimes people need to advocate for themselves and know what they're paying.
So if someone's in the moment and they catch themselves like either being scared this good client's going to leave me, that would probably have been just knowing myself, that would my reaction versus being indignant that they would possibly ask for that. In that moment, and it's easy for you and I to have this conversation, lean in, breathe into it, try to understand. But like, what are some things that people can help in terms of boosting their awareness, or maybe in addition to not having to make a decision? I love that. And it sounds so thoughtful. It's not that you're avoiding it. It's actually, I'm sure they would really appreciate it. Like in the moment, are there any tips or something someone can do to bring themselves back present, focusing on what's going on for the other person versus like being in reaction?
Right. I think, I know breathing sounds kind of, corny and oversaid, but I do think breathing actually physically calms your body. You don't need to be like, you can quietly take a breath. The other thing is you can always say something like, oh, can you tell me more? I didn't realize this was an issue. And by having them say more, you're getting curious. And I think anytime you can ask questions about somebody's experience, first of all, what you're doing to the client is you are hearing them, you're listening to them, you're giving them a chance to use their voice. That in itself might be all they needed. It might not even be about the money or the fee. Then it also buys you a little time to really hear them. And so my strategy always, and I used to do this when I was counseling, I used to counsel many years ago, angry adolescent girls who had eating disorders. So you can imagine they didn't really want to see me. And so when they'd get really angry at me, I would get really curious about that anger and what was going on. And when you're curious about the other person and you're asking them to tell you more, when did you start thinking about the fees? Was there something that triggered this? And then you get more data, then what ends up happening is that other person calms down with whatever they're feeling, and you have a chance to not be defensive, to not be anxious. You're doing what advisors do, which is you're gathering data and you're trying to understand where that person's coming from. And I do think those things really can help. If you feel, my last tip is if you feel like this is going to be a big deal and you're going to need to really calm down, you can say, I'm really glad you brought that up. Ask one question, then somehow find a reason to get out of the room, take a couple of deep breaths and come back. Like give yourself a timeout. You're creative. You're all professionals. You'll figure out how to do that. But curiosity is always where I go. I don't know about you, Ellen, but that tends to help me just really focus on the other person and get the data I need. Because often it's not what we think it is.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think where I would go is about just trying to send appreciation for whatever's going on for them.
Yeah.
Like really being and moving my physical attention to the other side of the table. So the curiosity is just, even if I'm making it up, feeling like that's so interesting. Like, right. And the second that I move it away from here, and onto them, that tends to help the situation. And I think your advice about those listening skills wouldn't just be for this situation. It would be anything, right? The same energy could come up when people are like, my investments aren't doing well. Yeah. Why aren't you doing better? It feels like the same thing where someone might get defensive, but the other person is just in their own creation, whatever that is.
Right. And the appreciation, I love that word, because when we're appreciating our clients, you have to think about it this way. So when a client brings up your fees, brings up something like the market, or they're not happy with your performance, that is a compliment. They trust you enough to tell you bad news. And so reminding yourself and appreciating them verbally, I really am so glad you brought this up so we could talk it through. It could be that simple, but it is a compliment. Sometimes it doesn't feel like one, but it is, because ultimately, if you're going to have a long-term relationship with a client, you are going to have bumps in the road, because that's the nature of relationships. And each time you work through a conflict or a difference or a fee conversation, I really think the bond gets stronger. And the next time you work through something, it's going to be that much easier. And often it ends up being very satisfying for both parties. We have all sorts of messages about how scary it's going to be and how awful it's going to be. And if you kind of hang in there and have the conversation, really, you just learn something about each other.
So if you know you have a big negotiation up, maybe not, but a negotiation that's coming up with a staff member, or maybe you're buying someone else's firm, or you're buying a car, whatever it is, what are some of the mental prep that can happen ahead of time? Is it rehearsing how you want it to go in your mind? Is it like, what are some tips that you would have for people ahead of the negotiation?
I think that's a great question. I think number one, you do want to practice. You do. I mean, for me, I'm a writer, so I like to write things down. I don't memorize it, but I get those words going. However you practice, like if you were to practice for a presentation, negotiation, and hearing the words, saying it out loud, even if you're talking to a mirror or to yourself or to Zoom or whatever it might be, is going to help you with the word choice, be comfortable in your body. Also, your brain starts to rewire a little bit. So the practice is key. Second of all, do something that makes you feel good and confident right before the meeting. So I'll share a little secret today. Coming on to talk to Ellen is exciting, but can be a little anxiety provoking, because, I know there's a lot of people out there watching this. So I went and took a couple ski runs, because it's what makes me confident and feel really powerful. And I had the opportunity to do it. You may not be able to do that. So maybe it's the power pose. Maybe it's listening to some music that really gets you charged up. Maybe it's doing meditation. Whatever it is, get in that space where you're your best self and set yourself up to feel good about yourself walking into that negotiation. The last thing is, when the negotiation's over, do a quick debrief, but keep it short. Don't beat yourself up for 24 hours. You want to learn from each and every negotiation, but debrief it, learn from it, and then let it go. You'll have another opportunity, I'm sure.
I love that. And I could imagine that this is aligned with what you said. Also, I'm big on visualizing things ahead of time, like exactly how I would like it to play out. Not that if it doesn't happen that way, but to me, it's in how I'll feel as that's happening. Like I'm feeling grounded and calm. And when they come back, I'm just curious, or all the things that you've said to us, would you find that would be a helpful strategy for people ahead of time as well?
I definitely think visualization can be used. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up because I tend to be less visual. So my prep might be a little different than yours, but I think visualization, setting intentions, and overall being compassionate to yourself and knowing that I'm going to do the best I can. It's a learning experience, and reminding yourself that often when you're in a big negotiation, the other person also has their own set of feelings, whether they're showing it or not. So, I think if you do all of those things, like I said at the beginning, it's a muscle you build up over time. And, while I don't think it ever gets easy, and maybe some people it does, I know for myself, it never gets easy, it gets more comfortable, and it becomes much more enjoyable to learn about what that other person wants, what their needs are, and to figure out how you can provide that value. The last thing is sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes it's not a fit, and that is okay as well. That can be successful negotiation, because I know we've all worked with people that we thought later, wish I had not negotiated this deal. So it's okay to walk away sometimes too.
That's great. I love that you're out there talking about this, Kathleen. If people, I know you have a course coming up, you have other resources. What is the best way for people to be in touch with you?
Sure. I have a masterclass on negotiation that I love doing. It's virtual and group and individual coaching. And if you go to my website, breakingmoneysilence.com, you will see all the information about what I'm up to with advisors, what I'm doing coaching wise. And for the course in particular, it's breakingmoneysilence.com/negotiating-masterclass. And you'll get to the sales page, all the information and details. I love running it, so I can't wait to start the next group.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I love that you're out there supporting all the people that you support, the women's that you have, the advisors that you have, the end clients that ultimately got supported as well. And thank you so much for you're generously coming back on the show and sharing all these great tips and tools with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. It was fun.
Yeah, and thank you to all of you out there listening and watching. Again, my name is Ellen Rogin, and you can learn more about me at ellenrogin.com. And if you go to ellenrogin.com/horse's mouth, you can download my special report, What Extraordinary Advisors Know That Others Don't. And I have all sorts of programs and ways to support advisors in growing their businesses as well. So the question to ponder today is, how can you even be more comfortable in your negotiation? And remember, be great and create great every single day.